My family abandoned me after my friend's sister claimed I got her pregnant, and now the truth is out. It all began about a year ago, when a falsehood completely flipped my life upside down. The deceit went so far out of control that even now, looking back, it seems unreal. In life, there are moments when the things you least expect end up being the things that most trouble you. I never imagined that I would be here, telling complete strangers about the worst period of my life on the internet, but here we are. The experience of having someone you love and trust turn against you is akin to finding yourself in the center of a disaster's debris, baffled as to how it could have gone so terribly wrong. My life before this was typical, even unremarkable in many aspects. I felt I had a decent job, a close-knit group of friends, and a decent relationship with my family. I would have laughed if someone had told me that a year later I would be facing legal issues with my own parents, being shunned by my family, and being portrayed as the bad guy in my tiny community. However, that is precisely what transpired, and it all started with a falsehood that still bothers me now. The starting point of everything. I have to go back to the beginning to really explain what happened. Since we were little, Adam, my best friend, and I have been close. We attended the same schools, lived in the same neighborhood, and even belonged to the same social circles. Rachel is Adam's younger sister. Although Rachel had been in my life from the beginning, we weren't very close. She was merely Adam's younger sister, calm, collected, and slightly odd in the way that siblings are sometimes. Even if we periodically got together for family get-togethers or group hangouts, our connection was always friendly and distant. Rachel had her own challenges growing up, as far as I knew. She had struggled with mental health problems, but information about them was never made clear. I never asked, and Adam never really talked about it. It wasn't my place. I just assumed over the years that Rachel's life was as secret as she appeared to be. Since we essentially led parallel lives with little incentive to interact other than to say hi, she wasn't the kind to open up easily. However, everything changed when I unexpectedly received a message from Rachel one day. Her reply caught me off guard because it was the first time we had ever contacted one another directly. I initially assumed she would be contacting me on an Adam-related matter. Maybe she needed help with something or wanted to seek a favor on behalf of her brother. However, it was immediately apparent that this was something else when I opened the message. "Hey, are you free to talk?" was the short message that set off the impending pandemonium. Her SMS message seemed slightly nervous, but not concerning. "Okay, what's going on?" I answered, thinking it would be a simple inquiry about school or a personal recommendation. I never even considered the possibility that she might be coping with a significant issue. She then dropped a bombshell on me, saying, "I'm pregnant." My heart fell. Even though I didn't know Rachel well, I knew enough to understand that this wasn't going to be an easy scenario. Given her past struggles with mental health, this kind of potentially life-altering news was concerning. I reasoned that perhaps she just wanted someone to talk to. While she made her way down the challenging path ahead, I would have been more than happy to listen. But before I could even compose myself to respond, Rachel revealed the shocking truth. I** was the father. I can still picture myself looking at my phone in shock, my mind going blank while I struggled to comprehend what she had said. How could she have come to that conclusion? How on earth could she say that? I had never been romantically or intimately involved with Rachel. In all the years I had known her, I had hardly given her a hug. We had never spent time together on our own, and none of the things she was claiming to have happened had ever happened. And now she was informing me that I was the father of her child. "Rachel, I think there's been some kind of mistake," I responded back, my hands shaking slightly. There has to have been a miscommunication or a moment of uncertainty on her end. Perhaps her fear was clouding her judgment. "No, there's not a mistake," she confidently interrupted. "The only person it could be is you." Fear began to set in. My thoughts were racing, attempting to make sense of what was going on. Although I was certain that this was untrue, Rachel was adamant, almost unsettlingly so. She would not listen to me, and would not stop insisting that I was the father. I attempted to explain calmly, telling her that nothing like that had ever happened between us, but it was like talking to a wall. She didn't seem to hear me. "Rachel, this is absurd." I texted her once more, trying not to lose my temper. "It's the most we've ever spent together." She would not give up though. The discussion took on the atmosphere of a bad dream in which reason and reality had no place. I tried to explain things to Rachel, but she was adamant that I was the reason she became pregnant. I didn't even consider the possibility that she might be lying at the moment. I assumed she was experiencing a mental health crisis, being terrified, or being confused. I had no reason to think that she was making this whole thing up, especially for something as important as this. But as the days went by, things started to get out of hand in ways I could never have predicted. What began as an odd and unsettling charge quickly turned into something much more serious. And before I knew it, Rachel's deception had expanded beyond just the two of us and had taken over my entire life. The disagreement within the family. When my parents were involved, that was the first serious indication that things were going to turn very bad. My parents and I were quite close, and my family had always been very important to me. We had never experienced any significant problems, although they were rigid in several aspects, particularly with regard to family values and customs. At least, not until Rachel's charge was considered. My parents must have gotten in touch with Rachel soon after our first talk. My parents were phoning me the next thing I knew, and I wasn't sure how she had phrased the issue. They were enraged beyond anything I had ever seen. I was called a total shame to the family, reckless and immoral by my frantic mother. Even my father, who is typically the more level-headed one, was furious. "How did you allow this to occur?" During one of our first heated discussions about the situation, my mom yelled. "What could have made you so careless?" Desperate to get them to see sense, I implored, "Mom, I swear to you, it's not true. I'm not the father. I took no action at all." However, they ignored me. Rachel's word was gospel to them. The fact that I had never dated her was irrelevant. The fact that I could prove my innocence didn't matter. I was, in their views, already guilty. Denying responsibility for the child I fathered out of wedlock was even worse than the prospect of me fathering an unmarried child. To them, it was unimaginable. They considered me to be a slacker and a liar, someone who was avoiding his obligations and running away from a child they thought was mine. Our disagreements grew increasingly volatile. With my parents, every talk descended into an argument as they insisted that I step up and take care of Rachel's child. It didn't matter how many times I stated that I wasn't the father. It made no difference how much proof I had. They were uninterested in listening. I once provided them with evidence that I had been out of the state when Rachel would have given birth. I had enough of evidence to support my absence from work during those pivotal weeks. That was insufficient, though. They dismissed the evidence as unimportant, claiming that people make mistakes. I felt as though I was in a bad dream in which there was nothing I could do to establish my innocence. I was crushed under the weight of their accusations and disbelief. My parents, who I believed would always believe me, and who had always been my rock, had turned against me in the most horrible way. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to persuade them of the reality. It was terrible, not only because of the charges, but also because I felt like I had been betrayed deeply on an emotional level. Severing the link. The situation deteriorated further as the weeks passed into months. My parents' conviction that I was lying solidified even further. They began to put more and more pressure on me to take care of Rachel's child. They even threatened to disown me if I didn't step up. I didn't take their warning seriously at first. I assumed they were just expressing their anger and emotions at the time. However, I soon saw they weren't playing bluffs. One of the darkest days of my life was the day they ultimately disconnected from me. My family and my sense of belonging vanished out of nowhere, leaving me feeling as like I had lost a huge portion of who I was. They stopped messaging, calling, and asking me to family get-togethers. It seemed like I had vanished from the world. I was not their son anymore. I was. Until I bowed to their demands, they refused to recognize me as a pariah. The seclusion was suffocating. Many evenings were spent lying awake, going over every discussion in my mind, and trying to figure out what I could have said or done better. However, the truth was that I was unable to convince them to trust me, no matter how hard I tried. I had to handle the aftermath on my own, because they had already made up their minds. My friends helped me along the way, but I still felt totally lost. My parents had played such an important role in my life, and now they were gone, severing our relationship over a falsehood from which I was unable to break free. Rachel remained unwavering in her refusal to give up. I kept trying to get her to take a paternity test, but she wouldn't have it. She insisted that I was the father. It was annoying. It was like being stuck in a loop, with no matter what I did or said, nothing mattered. However, I was aware that I needed to take action to permanently erase my record. I couldn't let this falsehood destroy my life any more than it already did. I thus made the decision to file a lawsuit. I pursued legal action to compel a paternity test because I was determined to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that I was not the father. The examination findings. About 6 months into this nightmare, Rachel gave birth to her baby, and I wasn't there at the hospital. I didn't receive an invitation. Throughout the entire process, I was an outsider, observing from the sidelines as my family proudly celebrated the birth of a child that wasn't mine. It resembled a perverse parallel universe, in which I was the antagonist of a narrative in which I had no part. But eventually, the hour of truth arrived. As I had always suspected, the paternity test results showed that I was not the father. It seems like it was yesterday when I first saw the test results. Unquestionable evidence that I had been telling the truth the entire time was there in black and white. That moment was filled with an incredible sense of relief, but it was soon eclipsed by rage. Nobody, least of all my parents, had believed me after I had spent months being hauled through hell on suspicion of a crime I had not committed. I thought that the ordeal would finally come to an end when I sent my parents the test results. Surely, now that they had solid proof, they would apologize. They would acknowledge their error and conclude that they ought to have trusted me from the beginning. Perhaps we could start mending the harm that had been caused. But I encountered more confusion rather than consolation and excuses. The vapid excuses. My parents' reaction wasn't what I had anticipated when they learned the test results. They didn't call me to apologize or accept that they had been incorrect. Rather, they bombarded me with urgent texts and calls, attempting, if unsuccessfully, to put things right. Their honest and empty apologies felt. Rather than truly making apologies for the suffering they had caused, their main priority seemed to be brushing everything under the rug. My dad even attempted to send me money, as though the huge emotional scars they had caused could be somehow healed by a few $100s. Rather than seeming like a true betrayal of family, it seemed like they were handling the whole thing like a commercial transaction. I was enraged. You believe that hurling money at me will make things better? I couldn't conceal my irritation when I texted back. My dad said, "We just want you back in the family," which totally missed the mark. They desired to act as though nothing had occurred, as though I hadn't been disowned for sticking up for the truth, and that they hadn't spent months accusing me of something I hadn't done. It enraged me. I wasn't prepared to pardon them. Not by a long shot. How was I able to? Over their own son, they had chosen to trust a lie. After the truth was out, they ostracized and disowned me, and only now did they wish to make apologies according to their conditions. It was insufficiently good. They weren't ready to provide me the sincere regrets and accountability I needed. The fallout and the local rumors. Rachel persisted even after the paternity test showed that I was innocent. Actually, she lied even more than before. She started chatting with people in the community, claiming that I had fabricated the paternity test in some way. She said that I had bought the lab off to rig the results to my advantage, which was obviously untrue. However, it made no difference. People began to accept her. Rumors fly through a tiny community like wildfire. All of a sudden, every time I went somewhere, people would whisper and give me sidelong glances. I would get confronted in public by others who would ask why I wasn't taking care of the infant and accuse me of abandoning my child. It was exasperating. While shopping one day, I happened to run into an old high school friend. He came over to me with that condescending, critical expression so many had taken on. "Why don't you take the initiative?" he questioned, his tone brimming with contempt. "Why do you not look after your child?" "I am not the dad." I lost it, my annoyance erupting. However, he only shook his head and turned to go, his expression filled with astonishment. Despite my repeated assertions and ample evidence, many persisted in accepting Rachel's falsehoods. I remained the villain in the eyes of the public, even though she had portrayed herself as the victim. It was emotionally and physically taxing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The last discrepancy. Things worsened just when I thought they couldn't be any worse. I received legal paperwork in the mail a few weeks following the paternity test results. My folks had me sued. It was unbelievable to me. I was utterly numb as I sat there, staring at the documents in my hands. Now my own parents, the ones who were meant to be my source of love and support, were dragging me into court. The complaint claimed that I had caused them great distress by refusing to accept responsibility for Rachel's kid, so causing emotional harm. I had never heard something so ridiculous in my entire life. My lawyer was equally as astonished as I was when I phoned him right away. I had to take the case seriously, even if it was largely without merit. The paternity test results, Rachel's communications, and documentation of the harassment I had experienced were all collected by me over the course of the following few weeks. Although my attorney was optimistic about our chances of success, it was heartbreaking that my parents were dragging me through the courts. My parents tried to play the victims in court, but the evidence was unmistakable. Their deceit was exposed by the judge, who dismissed the case and mandated that they reimburse my legal expenses. Even if it was a minor victory, it didn't feel real. Nobody should ever have to experience winning a case against their own family. The local news had covered the lawsuit extensively. The small town I grew up in saw headlines like "Son sued by parents for emotional harm" and "Family torn apart by lies and betrayal." I felt ashamed. Unaware of the whole situation, others thought me to be the callous son who deserted his family without cause. How about Rachel? She continued to act as the victim, telling anybody who would listen that she and the child had been abandoned by me. Naturally, following the lawsuit's dismissal, my parents made one final attempt at reconciliation. They wrote me a lengthy letter that was full of pretentious phrases like "family unity" and "moving past the hurt," but it still had no genuine apology or admission of their part in the whole situation. They did not want to acknowledge the sorrow they had caused, and instead wanted to go on according to their own terms. I didn't reply to their correspondence. The ambush reunion. After a few months, I began to reconstruct my life. I could finally feel like I could breathe again, as the toxic family turmoil started to fade into the background. In an attempt to move past the nightmare, I concentrated on my work and made an investment in the friendships that had survived the mayhem. Then at the grocery store, I unexpectedly ran into my cousin Melissa. Even though we weren't very close, we were always cordial. We said our regular hellos and caught up on each other's lives and jobs. But then she made a shocking revelation. "Hey, are you aware of the upcoming family reunion?" She questioned in a lighthearted manner, but her eyes were worried. My stomach fell out. Combined? No, that wasn't something I had heard about. "What is happening?" Melissa was uneasy and obviously regretted bringing it up. "Well, your folks are planning a sizable family get-together. Everyone has been invited, even friends and distant family, and they are promoting it as an opportunity for peacemaking." A wave of incredulity and rage washed over me. Reconciliation. Was this their newest ploy? To use a public event as leverage to force me to forgive them in order to coerce me into returning? The worst aspect, too, they were informing everyone that I was going to be there. They're announcing my arrival to people I asked, my voice tense with annoyance. Melissa gave a nod. "Yes, it seems like you're a part of the entire thing." It was unbelievable to me. Once more, my parents were attempting to write the story themselves, painting me as the ungrateful son in the event that I failed to show up. If I went, it would be on their terms, a trap set up to get me to look good in front of people who didn't know the truth. I sent a farewell note to my folks that evening. I did not mince phrases. I informed them that I was aware of the reunion, but that I was not planning to go. If they wanted to heal our relationship, it had to start with their respecting my boundaries. Fake grins and public performances weren't my thing. I required sincere regrets and responsibility. There was nothing more to be said until they were prepared to give that. I didn't care if they responded. I wasn't expecting one. I had had enough of their shenanigans. The last bite. Naturally, they didn't stop there. My dad left me a lengthy voicemail a few days later, which I initially neglected to listen to. But ultimately, my curiosity won out, and I decided to play it. "Son, I'm not sure why you're doing this," he said in a frustrated tone. "You're just tearing the family apart while we're trying to make things right. This was meant to be our chance to start over together. Your grandparents would be really dissatisfied with your approach to this. They would have preferred that you remain with your kin." The guilt-tripping was almost comical in its blatantness. Nearly. Even my dad found it upsetting to hear me mention my grandparents, who had always encouraged me. They were obviously still refusing to take accountability for what they had done. I remained the issue in their eyes. The family was being torn apart by me. However, I was determined not to succumb to their deceit once more. After leaving a message on their voicemail, I banned their numbers. I was done talking about it. I had said all I had to say. There was no use in interacting with them if they couldn't respect my boundaries. Although there were no problems during the reunion, I did notice several pictures that distant relatives had uploaded to the internet. The images showed my parents laughing and grinning while surrounded by loved ones. Seeing them behave as though nothing was wrong, and that they hadn't spent the previous year attempting to ruin my life, was almost strange. Proceeding forward, things started to gradually calm down after the reconnection. It had been months since I'd heard from Rachel, my parents, or anyone else in my family. They appeared to have come to terms with the fact that I would not be returning. I felt at ease for the first time in a long time. However, the damage persisted despite the lack of drama. In the process, I had lost most of my extended relatives. I mean, sure, some family had gotten in touch with me to offer their condolences and support, but mostly I was cut off from the family I knew. On certain days, I wondered if I had made the correct decision. One of the hardest things someone can do is walk away from their family, and no matter how justifiable it seems at the time, there will always be that one last question. Have I reacted too strongly? Could I have acted differently in this situation? Those questions occasionally tormented me. But then I would recall everything that had transpired, including how they had accepted Rachel's deception, how they had turned against me without hesitation, and how they had attempted to control me at every point. I wouldn't regret the decision I had made to defend my own interests. I had set limits with my parents for the first time in my life, and even though it had hurt, it was essential for my own mental health. Things began to get better gradually. I lost myself in my work and concentrated on the friendships that had held through the mayhem. Adam stayed one of my best pals in spite of everything. Even when it meant putting his own family at a distance, he had always stood by me. The hope for a better future. Since the nightmare started more than a year ago, I've discovered a lot about who I am. I've discovered that family is about more than simply blood. It's also about unconditional support, trust, and respect. Walking away might be the hardest but most crucial thing to do when those things are absent. It's uncertain whether or not I will ever get along with my parents again. Perhaps they will come to their senses and issue a sincere apology at some point. Perhaps Rachel will acknowledge her lies at last. I'm not holding my breath though. I'm concentrating on creating a life free from their manipulation and control for the time being. It hasn't been simple, and the weight of all that has occurred still affects me on some days. However, I also feel liberated since I've regained authority over my own story. I've won already because I'm not letting my family control my life anymore. I'm taking each step on my own now. All of the decisions and choices are up to me, and I feel like I'm finally on the right path for the first time in a very long time. Even though the path ahead may not be clear, all that important is that I get to walk it.